There are battles where bullets decide who lives and who dies, and then there are battles where sound does it first. Picture a snow-choked town on the Eastern Front, its church spire shattered, its streets lined with burned-out T-34s, and Soviet soldiers digging in, convinced they've already seen the worst war can offer. They have faced artillery, tanks, machine guns, and endless winter, but on this night, what comes for them is not just steel and fire. It is a weapon built to invade their minds before it tears apart their bodies. A chorus of shrieking rockets, each launch wailing like some monstrous metal animal, rolls across the horizon. Veterans who have marched from Stalingrad to Kiev feel their knees shake as the air itself seems to scream. This is not just bombardment. This is a demonstration of industrialized fear. And within minutes, one hidden German battery will turn an entire Soviet regiment from hardened fighters into men who cannot stop looking over their shoulders at a sky they can no longer trust. On the evening of January 22, 1944, Captain Mikhail Sokolov of the Red Army's 312th Rifle Regiment stood in the bell tower of a ruined church, staring out over the frozen fields east of the town of Zorndorf. The sun had already sunk behind the black silhouettes of pine trees, leaving only a smear of crimson on the horizon that blended with the distant glow of burning fuel depots. Temperatures hovered well below freezing, and each breath left a ghostly trail in front of his face as he swept his binoculars across the snow. His regiment had taken the town at noon after a brutal street fight that left German grenadiers sprawled in doorways and machine gunners frozen where they fell behind shattered brick walls. His orders were simple: hold Zorndorf against the inevitable counterattack. The men under his command were veterans, survivors of retreats, encirclements, and winter offensives that would have broken lesser soldiers. They had learned to read the battlefield with animal instinct. The distant thud of enemy guns, the flash of muzzle fire, the rattle of tracked vehicles over cobblestones, all of it formed a language they understood too well. Tonight, that language went silent. No probing artillery, no reconnaissance aircraft, no tank engines grinding through the dark. The eerie quiet made Sokolov uneasy. He ordered additional listening posts on the eastern outskirts and had his signal officers check the lines again, convinced that the Germans were repositioning for a coordinated assault. The town smelled of brick dust, cordite, and the faint sweetness of spilled antifreeze from wrecked vehicles, a familiar cocktail that usually meant the worst was over. Yet his intuition screamed that something entirely new was coming, something none of them had trained for. 2 kilometers away, in a snow-covered orchard screened by bare, skeletal apple trees, Hauptmann Otto Weiss walked along a row of squat, boxy launch frames arranged on crude wooden planks. His boots crunched in the crusted snow as he ran a gloved hand along the cold steel tubes of the new rocket system his battery had been ordered to test in combat. The weapon was officially designated as a heavy multiple rocket launcher, but the men had already given it a different name after hearing its first live firing during training: Höllenorgel, the organ of hell, because when all the tubes roared at once, the sound resembled a deranged church organ played by a madman. Weiss had spent years coordinating conventional artillery barrages. He thought he understood firepower. The first time he saw an entire salvo of rockets leave the rails in a sheet of flame and smoke, even he had taken an involuntary step back. Each launcher in his battery carried rows of fin-stabilized rockets fitted with high-explosive warheads and fuses configured for airburst over soft targets. Instead of the sharp crack of howitzers, these weapons announced themselves with an unearthly rising shriek as the rockets accelerated from the tubes, leaving twisting trails of smoke that clawed across the sky. In training, observers had reported that some soldiers instinctively ducked before the rounds even landed, overwhelmed by the sound alone. Tonight, Weiss had been given coordinates that put his target squarely inside Zorndorf.
warehouses converted into Soviet ammunition dumps, command posts, and staging areas for a renewed offensive. The order from divisional command had been blunt: break their will, not just their formations. He checked his watch, then the alignment stakes hammered into the snow. Rocket crews stood poised at their firing panels, faces pale in the moonlight, waiting for the word that would unleash a kind of bombardment none of them fully understood.
Back in Zorndorf, Captain Sokolov descended from the bell tower, his joints stiff from the cold and the long day's fighting. He moved through the nave of the shattered church, stepping around broken pews and piles of bricks, as a medic bandaged a wounded radio operator by candlelight near the altar. Outside, in the courtyard, soldiers huddled around tiny, carefully shielded fires, their breath mingling with the smoke as they warmed frostbitten fingers over tin mugs of watered-down soup. The men spoke in low voices about the coming night, betting cigarettes on whether tanks or infantry would strike first. To them, German artillery barrages were a familiar terror. They had dug through them before. The absence of preparatory shelling was almost comforting. It suggested, to their minds, that the enemy was stretched thin and improvising. At 1943 hours, the illusion shattered. The first thing they noticed was not light or impact, but a distant rising howl on the eastern horizon. It started as a low moan, like wind forced through a narrow valley, then climbed in pitch until it sounded like metal claws being dragged across the sky. Veterans glanced at one another, confused. This was not the deep, percussive rumble of heavy guns, nor the sharp whine of incoming mortars. Within seconds, the sound multiplied, as if dozens of invisible sirens had been switched on at once. The courtyard fell silent. Men who had survived artillery storms, so thick they turned soil into boiling mud, now felt something far more primitive stir in their stomachs. The air itself seemed to vibrate, carrying an approaching scream that made conversation impossible. A private dropped his mug, its contents splashing unnoticed onto the snow, as he stared upward at a night sky suddenly filled with lines of faint light arcing toward the town like a swarm of fiery comets.
The rockets hit not as individual explosions, but as a rolling wave of detonations that seemed to fold the town in on itself. The first salvo burst above the railway yard, where Soviet trucks and ammunition crates were packed tight between sagging freight cars. High explosive warheads, fused to detonate in the air, showered the area with fragments that ripped through canvas, steel, and flesh indiscriminately. A wall of orange light erupted across the horizon, followed almost instantly by a crushing, concussive blast that knocked men off their feet and blew out what remained of the church's stained glass windows. The organ of hell had been designed not only to destroy material targets, but to saturate an entire zone so thoroughly that defenders could no longer find a place to hide. For Sokolov's regiment, there was suddenly no such thing as cover. Within seconds, secondary explosions began to ripple through the town as ammunition stores cooked off, sending rockets and shells spinning in every direction like deranged fireworks. The shriek of incoming salvos blended with the roar of detonations into a continuous, brain-numbing cacophony. Men who had instinctively dropped into foxholes realized that the airburst pattern meant fragments were raining almost straight down, turning trenches into traps. Others curled against walls that disintegrated under the assault, showering them with bricks and splinters. Radios crackled with half-formed reports, then went dead as antennas and power supplies were shredded. Fire leapt from building to building, fed by fuel spilled from ruptured vehicles. The snow, once a smooth white blanket, became a cratered landscape of blackened slush and twisted metal. For many soldiers, the greatest horror was the delay between salvos, those brief, ragged moments of silence when they waited for the next screaming wave, hearts pounding, realizing they no longer trusted their own courage to hold.
In the orchard, Hauptmann Weiss watched the horizon glow as his battery completed its third salvo.
Even at this distance, the ground trembled faintly under his boots with each rippling detonation. Through his field glasses, he could see columns of smoke rising from multiple points in Zorndorf, flickering with the red pulse of ongoing explosions. His radio operator relayed fragmentary intercepts from forward observers. Soviet vehicles burning in rows, command posts obliterated, entire companies scattered and unable to reform. Yet the raw damage told only part of the story. Reports also mentioned soldiers wandering in circles, unable to respond to orders, some clutching their ears as if trying to block out sounds that had already passed. The organ of hell had done more than shatter masonry. It had hammered directly at the nervous systems of everyone caught beneath its arcs. Weiss realized that divisional command had been correct about one thing. This weapon was a form of psychological warfare disguised as artillery. When Soviet counter-battery fire finally sputtered to life, it landed wildly, scattering harmlessly in the fields well short of the rocket positions. The enemy's usual rhythm of response was gone, replaced by disjointed bursts that suggested units firing blindly simply to prove they still existed. Over the next 48 hours, reconnaissance patrols reported something Weiss had never seen on this front: organized Soviet platoons abandoning reinforced positions at the mere sound of a single rocket launcher test-firing a short salvo. The unique shriek of the rockets became a trigger for panic, just as infamous machine guns and mortars had done in other theaters of the war. Commanders on both sides began rewriting their tactics, some embracing the new technology, others quietly fearing what kind of battlefield humanity was building. In the ruins of Zorndorf, Captain Sokolov's remaining men dug in again, but they no longer feared the enemy they could see. They feared the unseen chorus beyond the tree line, waiting for orders to sing once more.